This is Prang Semi-Moist Watercolor Paint. It is different than other watercolors. When you get it, the container should always be open. If it's not open, please open it, but at the end of class when we clean up, we want to leave it open for several reasons. One reason is so that the watercolor pans themselves will begin to dry out so that they can be easier to use for the next person. Another reason is so that any colors you have mixed in the lid won't drip back down and contaminate the main pans. Now, semi-moist watercolor paint is different paint than other watercolor paint. When you're using it with your paintbrush, one of the things to be aware of is the paint is often sticky. It will or might stick to your paintbrush. What you need to do when you are painting is make sure your brush is all the way wet and that you're only ever barely touching the paint. You never ever should be smashing your brush into the paint, because if you do that, paint is very likely to get stuck to your brush, and if it gets stuck to your brush, it will become a glob on your paper and be wasted. We don't want to glob it on the paper because it will stay sticky and just waste the paint. Watercolor paint is meant to be added in thin layers. So here's how we should use it. With the color you want, you should have a brush that is already wet. I have a brush with water on it. You can see the water is in the brush. I can always wipe it on the edge so it's not way too wet if it seems like it was, but it's got enough water on it that it's not going to stick to the paint. And then, if I wanted to use, for example, a turquoise color, I'm going to barely touch the outside edge. I'm not pushing it into the paint, I'm just barely touching. And then I've got some paint on my picture, and I could mix it up in another color well. Let's say I wanted to add some paint to the yellow color to this turquoise mix. Should I take my turquoise covered paintbrush and put it right in the yellow? I should not. I should rinse my brush in the water, and then I can go into the yellow. Then I'm going to swirl very gently around the outside. Am I smashing my brush? No, I'm barely touching it, but it's picking up the yellow. And then if I mix it into that color, it changes it to a spring green, and I could use this color to paint with. Key tips to remember. Always leave the paint palette open, even at the end. Make sure your brush has water on it and is wet before you touch any of the paints. Whenever you're touching the paint, always barely touch it and don't press your brush in. Instead, gently swirl the brush on the surface. Make sure, whenever you go back to the main color, that you've washed your brush in the water before you use a different one. Also, it's a good idea, if you want to use the same color again, even, to mix up that color in the lid. If you need to clean out the lid, just get a lightly wet paper towel and scoop out the previously used colors. Remember, paint sets stay open. Keep water on your paintbrush. Gently touch the paints, but don't press into them.